Huskers Illustrated.
Let's go get a pick and score.
Yeah, it's on, baby. 2, 3, 1.
Let's go play some ball. Are you ready?
And now, here's your host, Chris Schmidt.
And welcome in with Huskers Illustrated HD. I'm Chris Schmidt with Aaron Babcock and Mike Babcock. The show for Nebraska fans, interactive. And guys, I tell you what, a lot's happened since the Holiday Bowl. Nebraska didn't really come to play against Washington. And moving forward, spring football around the corner. Husker basketball has wrapped up as they look towards postseason action. And the ping is in the air at Haymarket celebrating its 10th anniversary. Nebraska baseball is underway. Welcome in.
Thanks, Chris.
Let's talk a little bit about spring football, gentlemen, as a lot of new faces on the Nebraska coaching staff. Let's start out with who is out. Sean Watson, the longtime offensive coordinator for Nebraska, has moved on to Louisville. And Ted Gilmore, the longtime Nebraska receivers coach, he is off to join Mr. Kiffin in USC. Observations on that, your thoughts as Nebraska has decided to change things up on the offensive staff.
Well, and then they also lost Mike Eckler to Indiana. And so a lot of new faces this year on the staff. We got to meet with Tim Beck for the first time on Tuesday, his first public appearance as offensive coordinator. And I think we're going to see some interesting changes out of him. But definitely it's going to be an interesting spring as that staff starts to gel together, get used to everybody's new roles. Even people like Ron Brown that have been on staff for a long time are going to have new roles as he moves over to coach the running backs this year. But definitely a lot of change over there.
Well, Mike, you talk about the offensive staff, the new look, and what Nebraska wants to do offensively. It's still going to be a spread offense, and they're going to be multiple. Still some same philosophy points there for Nebraska and Coach Bo Pelini, but simplification, the word of the day Tuesday.
Yeah, simplification. And, I think in this day and age, you have to be multiple. You have to be multiple offensively. You have to be multiple defensively. That's what Nebraska has done under Bo Pelini defensively. But, simplification on offense, physical on offense, that, continued emphasis on the running game. And I think we saw a little bit of that last year, that Nebraska's running game stepped up a little bit. Particularly when Taylor Martinez was healthy, and which is a good example also of you can simplify the offense, but it still comes down to players. And one of the things that Tim Beck talked about on Tuesday in talking about the running back situation, coming in the fall, now this won't be a factor in the spring, but because these guys are coming in the fall, but with Amir Abdullah and Aaron Green, and then it appears that Braylon Hurt is going to be eligible and have an opportunity to play too. Bring in those guys, all of a sudden, as an offensive coordinator, which Tim Beck now is, you've got guys that can go 90 yards on one play. And as Tim Beck pointed out, it's a little easier to call a play that a guy can go 90 yards on one play than it is to call 10 or 12 plays, try to put together a series, avoid the penalties, hold on to the ball, move the ball down the field. So the simplification of the offense with the addition of players that can make that thing work is going to be the key in the fall. But in the meantime, in the spring, get the offense, learn how the terminology is going to change. It's going to be not as complicated as it has been in the past, and get the guys acclimated to that. And then when you get to the fall, some new guys are coming in, you start all over again, the competition. So the simplification of the offense is a first consideration, I think, offensively in the spring. But it'll have ramifications when you get into the fall and bring in some guys.
Well, a lot of times with Nebraska and the offense, the big play was certainly there last year. You can count a number of times where Roy Halou went 60 yards or better for a touchdown. Nebraska didn't have many 12-play, 80-yard drives, 7-minute drives to score. So the simplification, letting guys react rather than think about what they're doing, is going to be key.
Well, and people look at that offense, and Sean Watson took, in my opinion, a lot of unfair criticism in the second half of that season because you had no healthy quarterbacks. You look at the numbers, Taylor Martinez before that Missouri game was averaging 124 yards a game. Nebraska's offense after that dropped 125 yards a game. So he was so special in that first half of the season. There wasn't anybody there that could just automatically fill that role. Sean Watson looked like a genius in the first half of the season because Taylor Martinez was healthy. People hadn't scouted him. People hadn't seen him before. His speed was something you couldn't prepare for on film. So definitely that helped the offense with Taylor Martinez being healthy. Now this year, I think they still hope to maybe see him reemerge as a game breaker. Rex Burkhead isn't the kind of guy that's going to go 80 yards on one play most times. But so I think they're going to have to work on those longer drives, and that will be interesting to see if they have a little bit more of an identity with that this year in this, what they're calling a faster-paced offense.
Offensive line, so key. And you look at Nebraska, what they wanted to do offensively, and the motto has always been be physical, but the offensive line really has kind of gone to a standstill as the season went on against some of the better teams. Nebraska did not put up rushing numbers that they needed to, specifically in the fourth quarter. And two coaches will be looking at the offensive line. John Garrison moves up from a graduate assistant spot, and then Barney Cotton's, been there for a number of years, played for Nebraska, was there in 2003, and he's one of the first hires Bo had when he brought back a number of folks in 2008. So touch on that offensive line and how two heads might be better than one.
Well, it becomes kind of a numbers game, obviously, because you've got 5 interior linemen, and then John Garrison will also work with the tight end. So it's simple in terms of numbers. You need a couple of coaches, I think, and Nebraska has a tradition of that. We've seen how it was successful under Tom Osborne, first with Clete Fisher and Milt Tenneper, and then later on with Dan Young and Milt Tenneper. So it's so important. We want to talk about offensive systems and spread offense and tempo and simplification, all these things that are going to be factors, obviously, but it all begins up front. I mean, it's those offensive linemen that are going to determine whether this offense works. You can simplify as much as you want, but if you're not getting the push from the offensive line, if they're not getting the job done, it isn't going to make any difference. And so I think the importance of the offensive line is reflected in the fact that you've got now you'll have 2 guys working with the offensive line, plus bringing in as an intern or some sort of assistant coach, Brendan Stye, who was an outstanding offensive lineman. He knows something about playing the position, and Brendan's really an articulate guy. So the emphasis on the offensive line, I think, is crucial. That's how you're successful. And particularly at Nebraska, I think people understand that because this is the program that produced the pipeline and the program that produced Pipeline 2. And when you look at those national championship teams that Nebraska had under Tom Osborne, or even look under Bob Devaney, look at those offensive lines first. Those were the guys that got the job done. That's what made the offense productive, and I think 2 coaches is probably the way to go.
New faces with this Nebraska staff: Ross Ells, the new linebacker coach, Corey Raymond, the new secondary coach, and Rich Fisher will be able to teach plenty of technique to the wide receivers based on his golf knowledge, as he'll be helping out on the offense at the wide receiver spot. But let's go back to defense. Corey Raymond, I don't know that you can ever replace Marvin Sanders as a secondary coach, but I'll tell you what, Aaron, Alfonso Dennard, a good centerpiece for that secondary for Raymond.
Yeah, I think Corey Raymond's got a pretty nice group to start off with. You're talking about one of the top secondaries in the country, and obviously Prince was a huge part of that, but I think Dennard really came into his own, was tested a lot last year, which only made him better, and I think he appreciates that now. He knew that he was going to get tested last year. He knew how good Prince was, and that with his inexperience a year ago, that he was going to get to see a lot of balls, and he's a better player because of that. Austin Cassidy's got experience back there. Courtney Osborne, Ciante Evans saw a little time last year as a freshman. So really, if you're Corey Raymond, you've got to be pretty excited about at least the talent and the experience, and then obviously there'll be some young faces coming in there too that can make an impact.
Plus, Corey Raymond has worked with Bo Pelini, and I think that's important. That's one of the things that came out of this with the new hires. Bo has connection with these guys. And I think one of the things that he pointed out too in trying to fill staff positions, one of the things he was looking for was guys that were versatile. And you look at that the offensive coaching staff, and I think Braun Brown's a good example of that, because there's a guy that started his coaching career with a semi-pro team in New Jersey, coordinating a defense, and he coached defensive backs at Brown University, and he comes to Nebraska and he coaches wide receivers, he's coached tight ends. And then the last 3 seasons under Bo, he's coached tight ends, and now he's going to coach the running backs. He has that versatility that Bo was talking about, and you see the same kinds of things on the defensive side of the ball. And I think John Papucha is a good example. He works with the defensive ends. Now he's going to handle the defensive line. He's a recruiting coordinator. He coordinates the special teams. The versatility of the coaches is really important, And the fact that, and getting back to Corey Raymond, the fact that he's worked with Bo Pelini, I think is equally important in that situation.
You know, and we joke a little bit about Coach Fisher's experience with golf, and obviously we'd probably loved a little time with him out on the range.
We need it. Let's be honest.
But Bo almost hired him his first time around when he was going through coaches. So he's been on Bo's radar for a long time as a potential coach, and he just didn't have the right fit for him first time around. And I believe he said he was maybe looking at him for the.
He was looking at him as a
linebackers
coach.
So now he's putting with the right wide receivers, which just echoes what Mike says about these versatility among your coaches, and they can put 2-3 guys with positions and really make their staff very well rounded.
Plus, I think it's really important that there's a teaching function here. Sometimes people lose sight of the fact that, and I think that's one of the things that Marvin Sanders brought to this position. That's why you're talking about, what a successful coach he was twofold. He was a good teacher, and he was great with relating to the athletes. He had the ability, and that was the thing that Alfonso Dennard talked about on Tuesday, was how he was kind of a father figure to him and how important that was. And I think the guys that are being brought in here are, the teaching aspect is not to be underestimated. Carl Pelini even talked about Ross Ells and said he was probably as good a teacher as he's ever been around. Now, Carl worked with him a little bit at the University of Ohio, and is familiar with Ross Ells, who I think is a great story anyway, because he's coming home. He's coming home to Lincoln, played for his dad at Northeast High School. He worked with Barney Cotton at Hastings College. He was an assistant to Barney, and then when Barney left, he became the head coach there. He's had that kind of experience too, and I think the teaching function is another aspect of these coaches. You look at it, connection with Bo, and then the teaching function, I think, is really important.
Up next with Huskers Illustrated HD, Babcock, and Babcock will square off. Stick around.